We've all wondered what the future's going to be like, and tales of climate meltdown, bioterrorism and feral children dominate our newspapers. The future seems like a fearful place, but I went to meet a man who's remarkably optimistic about the future of humanity and our planet. I'm Dr. Kat Arney, and this is a Naked Scientist special about Mark Stevenson's new book, An Optimist's Tour of the Future. Rather than all the doomsayers predicting war, famine, death, drought, pestilence, climate catastrophe and Katie Price's next book, Mark asks what would happen if all the amazing technology that scientists are working on actually comes off. What if we can make robots that can think and feel? What about cheating death and engineering humans that can live for thousands of years? Solving the energy crisis using only some humble algae or a giant microwave? And how about restoring the drought-stricken Australian outback with nothing more than a few fence panels and a motorbike? An Optimist Tour of the Future is a rollercoaster ride of a book that leaves you shaking your head and muttering, "Wow!" as Mark speeds around the world asking the question, what next? I met up with him behind the scenes at an event celebrating the book's launch, so apologies for some of the background noise. And I asked him what first got him started on his amazing journey.
My original inspiration was that, I don't know about you, but I just find the level of science communication in the general press and its reflection on politics is a bit ropey. And a lot of popular science books are written for people who read New Scientist and Scientific American. And I just wasn't getting a clear enough picture, so I decided I wanted to go and find out for myself, because I couldn't find anything that gave me a sort of a scientifically accurate yet easy to grasp piece of, what's going on. What is biotech? I mean, we hear about it, don't we know? What is nanotech? I don't know, except that it's very small. What is really happening with the climate? So I just sort of followed my nose, really, and just thought, right, I'm going to go and find out. So that was the idea, really.
And why particularly optimistic, as opposed to just a general investigation of what's happening in the future?
Well, that's a very good question, because it didn't start off with the word optimist in the title. So it was actually a general investigation into the future. When I pitched the book originally, it was called A World Tour of the Future. But by the time I'd come back, I was so excited about all the things I'd heard about that nobody was telling me about, I'd not heard about in the press, that the word optimist somehow got itself into the title. So that was actually really sort of just the result of seeing what I'd seen. And
do you think that's a counter to the sort of doom and gloom, oh God, we're all going to hell, that seems to be common in the press at the moment?
Yeah, well, I mean, it has to be a counter, because I don't know about you, but the narrative of our future, as far as I can tell, is it's a bit rubbish. We're all going to hell in the handcart. You can't trust the generation below you because they're all feral and untrustworthy and they can't think. You can't trust left-wingers or right-wingers or atheists or religious people or what you eat or your neighbour. Vote for me, buy my paper, I understand. I mean, that's about it. And the thing is, I can't remember a time when I haven't heard that. So it's very interesting to meet a bunch of people who've just kind of rejected that whole narrative and just getting on with making things better. I mean, if they had a mantra, it would be, cheer up, it might happen.
And so what was your tour? How did you try and find out about things that are exciting and are positive?
Well, as I say, I didn't necessarily set out to find things that were exciting and positive. I just couldn't help bumping into them. But I decided to throw myself in at the deep end, really. Sort of being an amateur, I went off to see the transhumanists at the Oxford University's Future of Humanity Institute. And I'm sure many of your listeners know that transhumanists are the people who believe we can transcend our biology and live forever in some sort of glorious singularitarian sort of merging with our machines, reprogramming our biology future. And the reason I went to see them first was because I just wanted to throw myself in the deep end. Their agenda, is an absolute sort of car crash of what's happening in biotech and nanotech and infotech. So I started there and then sort of started to unravel it subsequently and just followed my nose, really. So from there I went to Harvard Medical School to meet George Church, who's probably the architect, the most important architect of the biotech revolution.
He's like the father of DNA studies.
He is. I mean, he pretty much started off the Human Genome Project, and now he's doing something called the Personal Genome Project, which is actually linking our genomes to our lifestyles, which is the one thing that we really don't know at the moment. And he's sequencing 100,000 genomes and asking lots of people deeply personal and embarrassing questions about their lifestyle over the next 10 years, so that we can start to tease out why it is that bananas make you ill, but they don't make your sister ill, that kind of thing.
So nature and nurture and
how
it all works, really.
Yes, kind of. I mean, it's often very, that nature versus nurture thing, which is very oversimplified. He's going to tease out the sort of the complexities within that, he hopes. And that could change medicine. For instance, it means that a lot of the drugs that we can't use at the moment because they kill 1 out of 100 people, with everybody having their genome sequence, we might be able to give the 99 people who could be saved that drug and the other person doesn't get it. So it could make drugs cheaper. So yes, I did that, and then I went off to think about artificial intelligence and robotics. So
it's fascinating, that bit. I love how you describe all the sort of robots and really how human and how animal they seem.
Yeah, it was quite bonkers meeting a robot and then sort of pretty much forgetting it was a robot sometimes later. I mean, I met the robots that acted, in a very human-like way. And in that way were the exact opposite of Keanu Reeves. And I think social robotics is a good thing because, most people find that technology quite difficult to get on with. And, having a machine that sort of reacts to you and responds to you in a way that you naturally understand and has sort of human-like cues means that I think our relationship with technology can become a bit more like friendship, which I think is only a good thing.
Being friends with our robots rather than just masters.
Yeah, we're also friends with our mobile phones and friends with our TVs and stuff, and friends with our lights.
We have to become friends with our broadband providers.
I think that may be a step too far.
Maybe one day. We can hope.
Yes. So that was very interesting. What did I do next? Then I went off to talk about nanotechnology with a guy called Eric Drexler, who is largely attributed with inventing the whole field, and talked about atomically precise manufacture, which is the idea that you can make things at a tiny... you can start to manufacture things with atomic accuracy. Now, that's a very controversial view. A lot of chemists go, this is ridiculous, you can't do that. I mean, trying to assemble anything down there is like, trying to have a tea party in the mosh pit of a death metal gig. There's just too much going on there with chemistry. But nonetheless, I explore our ability to increasingly control matter at lower and lower levels of granularity. And there is a nanotech revolution going on already. It's invading all sorts of areas of manufacture, including disproportionately number of hair straightening devices. There are disproportionate number of hair straightening devices that use nano coatings.
For which I am very grateful.
Yes, and your hair's looking lovely, I must say. Very
Thank you.
straight.
One of the things you sort of mentioned is maybe you'd have a machine on your desk, like the size of a printer, that could just produce stuff, food or things. I mean,
yes,
really?
This is the replicator from Star Trek made real, and really don't know that this is something that's now being looked into. For a while, it was sort of idea non grata in the world of nanotech because there was this kind of divide. But now they're cautiously thinking, well, maybe we should have a look at this, because if we can do that, and we can start to manipulate atoms at that level and just take in very simple chemical feedstocks, then it is a post-scarcity world. So it's worth investigating. As I say, I investigate that, but you don't say whether it's definitely going to happen or not. What is happening for sure, though, as I said, is that nanotechnology is already invading everything else and making things cheaper.
What really comes through in your book is that some of the ideas are clearly wacky. I mean, maybe we could live for 1,000 years, maybe we could live forever, maybe we could have something on our desk that makes us anything we like. But some of them seem very close. I mean, when you went to New Zealand, some of the ideas for sort of green energy.
Oh, yeah.
What happened in that kind of area?
Oh, because it's amazing, some of that stuff. I mean, really, the thing that I came away most, I suppose, optimistic about was our ability to handle climate change, which is currently obviously the cause célèbre for all the doomsayers at the moment. And
does seem
so.
impossible. Yes. How are we going to fix it?
Indeed, and then there's sort of any number of solutions. So biochar has recently got this incredible renaissance, that we should bury charcoal. And actually, you find out that actually putting charcoal into soils is very good because it increases food yield. So that's fantastic. So we can actually increase our yields whilst, handling climate change. Now, the problem is that certain soils and certain charcoals react in different ways. And if you put the wrong charcoal in the wrong soil, you can actually reduce your yield. So I went to see a company in New Zealand. They've created this big sort of microwave, essentially, which creates charcoal, called the Black Phantom. But the good thing about it is you can actively dial up exactly the right sort of carbon for your soils and get gas out of it simultaneously. So you've got free fuels. You can even get activated carbon, which is an incredibly porous form of carbon that's very, very useful. Most usefully, you can put it in underwear to filter your farts, which I didn't know about. But this means that a farmer can put this machine on his farm, take all his waste biomass, all his corn stalks, whatever that he was going to throw away anyway, probably, and turn it into something that will increase his yields, give him some free fuel, and make him smell nicer. And
the other thing I really liked was basically one of the most impressive examples of technology that you wrote about just seems to involve some fencing.
Yeah, I love
How does that work?
That was absolutely brilliant, because it reminded me that, even though we do have this massively innovative time now with technologies like nanotech and biotech and infotech sort of goosing themselves into this hyper-exponential growth, it reminds you that sometimes you just need to think a bit more carefully. So what these guys have done was realising that by changing the way they fence in cattle and getting them to move differently, they could increase the biodiversity on grassland farms across the world, sequester huge amounts of carbon into the soil, make their farms completely organic, reduce their cost of production sometimes fourfold. and end a cycle of drought and flood that they have in Australia, where I was, which is incredible. And what they're doing is simply mimicking the way that herds move in the wild. So they send them, we'll get one big herd, send them into one paddock. They move to the next paddock, they move to the next paddock, but they don't come back to that first paddock for 180 days, which means the grass has grown again. Rather than being stuck in there and just eating the grass constantly, the grass gets to regrow. And then them eating the grass, going away and then coming back and eating it again, causes basically a basic natural carbon pump that sequesters huge amounts, millions of tons of carbon into the soil.
And you've seen a lot of these technologies, even something as simple as a fence and something as complicated as nanotech or robots. How well accepted are these ideas becoming by politicians? Because it's all very well to have this amazing technology and you go, look, we can solve the drought in Australia with some fencing. Yeah. How can we actually make it happen?
Well, one of the things I'm very clear about is that I think, like a lot of people, and this trip reinforces for me, I've pretty much lost faith in the ability of governments to do this. And I don't think that's because the people who work for government are necessarily bad, but one thing that's very clear is the rate of pace of innovation has a different time constant to the rate and pace of legislation. I mean, by massively so. And one of the things that I talk about at the end of the book is institutional innovation, because when we talk about innovation, we'll often talk about what scientists are doing, but we might talk about what people are doing in fashion or music. There's always innovation going on around us. But institutions, and particularly government, don't innovate at all. I think the last innovation that government did was give women the vote about 100 years ago. And that's the last thing they changed. They haven't, I mean, seriously, parliamentary democracy hasn't changed in its basic shape for over half a millennia. And it moves very, very slowly. And we're increasingly becoming a networked world. And they're kind of the old school hierarchy. And I do think we're going to see a massive clash now between the people and the government, because the government just can't keep and doesn't serve us anymore, and I don't think they've bought it. So certainly all the people I met who were just getting on and doing it. In fact, Vicky Buck, who is one of the entrepreneurs in New Zealand I met, used to be a politician, and she left politics because she said, I'm going to replace one of her words, because one of her words was a bit fruity, but she said, if we wait for politicians to solve all these problems, we're basically all, and there was the fruity word.
All in trouble.
In trouble, yes, we are vexed, yes.
And another thing that obviously can affect technology is money, because there's this whole thing, well, if it can make you money, then companies will invest in it, then we'll get these technologies. Hence now we have amazing mobile phones because you can sell them and people want them. But we still have cars, and it seems very difficult to get proper green technology, the sort of things you're describing, into the mainstream, so solar panels and algae and all these kind of things.
Yeah, and it often does come down to economics. And sometimes technologies can reinforce a bad technological situation. Kevin Kelly's just written a brilliant book called What Technology Wants. One of the examples he uses is cars, because once you've got this massive infrastructure of cars, it kind of reinforces itself. You've got roads, you've got the system of distribution of fuels and whatever, and it actually makes it very difficult. It's a very high barrier for any other new technology to enter. So actually, in a way, some technologies can stifle innovation elsewhere if they become too embedded. But at the end of the day, you do find that what usually moves things along is somebody comes along and goes, I can do this cheaper. One example is what's happening in synthetic fuels now. So we experimented with biofuels, which is pretty much a disaster. But with what's happening with synthetic bio, there's a company called Dual Biotech that can take waste CO2 and put it through a photosynthesizing bacteria, and it creates petrol. Now, that means you can get your petrol out of the sky, because you can farm the CO2 out of the sky now using some other technology. I talk about another chapter from a chap called Klaus Lackner at Columbia University. Put it through this bacteria, and it'll create petrol. It'll take a couple of technology generations to make this as cheap as how we currently produce petrol, but it's a lot safer, it's a lot cheaper, you can get it anywhere.
And it fits into our current supply chain.
So you don't have to change over to hydrogen cars or electric cars. And the good thing is this is carbon neutral fuel, because you're taking the carbon out of the air. Yes, sure, you're burning it back, but now it's part of a cycle rather than just adding carbon into the atmosphere. I think in the next 10 or 15 years, you're going to see a massive revolution in biofuels, but they will be bacterially produced biofuels.
So this idea of sort of using things like ethanol or growing massive crops and turning them into fuel is dead end already. Well,
it depends how efficient those crops are. But I think if I were a betting man, and I'm not, and I talk about that in the book. For one thing, I don't want to bet on, for instance, is climate change. That's why I kind of think even if you're a skeptic, it really makes sense to go with the "it's happening" card, because if you're wrong, a lot of us could die. So I'm not a betting man. But if I were a betting man, then I would certainly be betting on bacterially produced biofuels. And I'm not the only person to say that. ExxonMobil have just given Craig Venter $600 million.
Ooh.
Because he wants, he said rather modestly, I have the ambition of replacing the entire petrochemical industry. And it makes sense if you're an author.
He said stuff like that before, though.
He's not shy of pronouncing himself to be, almost godlike. But there you go, that's Craig. We need characters like that.
What do you think was the most exciting thing, or what person got you most fired up? You went away going, wow, yeah.
I've been asked this question a few times, and it's quite a hard one to answer because they were all inspirational. I think what inspired me the most was not any one person or one technology, but how all those technologies are going to combine. So the things like the CO2, being used to go into bacteria to make fuel, that's two technologies combining. The fact that genome sequencing, because of what we're able to do with computers now and mass data processing, allows us to sequence genome data much more quickly and come up with possible medical solutions. So it's the actual combination, this kind of autocatalysis of all these technologies together. And I suppose the other thing that impressed me was that all the people I was meeting simply had kind of rejected this narrative of the future, which is all going to be rubbish, and said, well, it might be, but it might not be. There's everything to play for, and we're just going to get on with it. And all of them seem to be driven by the idea of making the world better. It was kind of a collective wow, actually, and I think that's actually more satisfying. I was collectively wowed. If that's, can one collectively be wowed? It sounds like an album by Haircut 100, doesn't it? Collectively Wow by Haircut 100, in at number 4.
And that's the thing I do have to pick you up on, is because clearly, was it Spandau Ballet or Duran Duran that you were favouring over the Pet Shop Boys?
Duran Duran at one point over the Pet Shop Boys, and I know you find that particularly upsetting.
This is clearly wrong, but...
don't buy the book, I'm clearly a fool.
So one of the other things, slight diversion, but one of the other things you sort of touch on in the book is that all this technology is very well, but we are humans, and as a species we have to come to terms with this and what this technology might actually mean for our own evolution, and how do we get people to actually accept technology, because it can be a bit scary.
Yeah, it is very scary, and I think that's why you see what a lot of people see as an anti-science backlash, and I think that's quite understandable, because when the pace of change is so rapid, and things like what's happening with biotech are coming at you really fast, you want something to hold on to. It does force us to think very, very much about what it means to be human. The thing is, we've been on this road for a long time. If you ask most people, do you think we should carry on trying to cure disease? They go, yes. And if you ask them in the next breath, do you think we should have the technology to allow people to live for 200 or 300 years? They say no. But that's actually the same question. There are people wandering around now with stem cell grown, replacement body parts. This isn't science fiction, it's happening. So the conclusion I came to was that I have this as well. I kind of resist it. But what human beings do most efficiently, better than... they're the only animal that do it, is we evolve now, not biologically, but through technology and culture. And trying to reject that, trying to hold on to something that is essentially human by rejecting the things that humans do best, i.e. evolve through technology and culture, is ultimately futile. And a man called Mark Badeau was an ethicist and philosopher I went to speak to. I think he said probably the most wise thing in the book. He said, change will come. You can either try to stop it from happening, you can ignore it, or you can try to influence it in a positive way. He says trying to stop it from happening is futile, and ignoring it is simply irresponsible. So that only leaves you one option, really, which is trying to influence it in a positive way. Which is, again, why I wanted to write the book, because I think people need to be informed, they need to see what's going on, and then, to be given the choice. Go, well, it's coming, what are we going to do about it? Are we going to do something good with it, or do something bad with it?
And what are your plans now for the book? Are you going to go on another tour in 10 years and see where we've got to? Where are we going next?
My personal plans is, right now I'm off to America to do a sort of ridiculous book tour. But I think it's like 18 cities in 12 minutes or something like that. It's quite crazy, speaking to billions of Americans. My next big project is something called The Age of Smart. I can't say too much about it now, but it is very much that, let's have some bottom-up networked governance. It's quite under the wire. We've only got 30 million people involved in it at the moment, and there'll be 100 million by the end of the year. I won't tell you where. But next year, I really want to put more power into networked governance. I think that's what's going to be my big thing next.
So getting people to organise themselves rather than men in suits telling us what to do. Organise
themselves, challenge themselves, force each other to think more critically, force themselves... I mean, it's called the information age for a reason, and one of the things that we're very bad at is handling information. You're not taught it at school. We're not taught scientific method very well. We're not taught Socratic inquiry, logic, and with a whole generation of people that don't know how to think critically. And I included myself in that. I've had to fight to learn. When I'm being biased, when I'm being prejudiced, when my newspaper is telling me something, that kind of agrees with me but isn't right. And I think it's hugely important when you've got mass access to knowledge and mass publication. We now need mass filtering. We need to be able to train ourselves to do it. And the individuals, the companies and the countries that do that will be the ones that succeed, I think, in the next 50 years. So I'm putting all my efforts into network governance and the promotion of critical thinking. So
the internet is for more than just pictures of cats. You think that we can really actually make good social change?
Yeah, but let's not forget the pictures of cats. I mean, I particularly like cats that look like Hitler.com. That is one of the funniest things I've ever seen in my life.
The future is here. It is cats that look like Hitler.
Yeah, and at least it's only cats that look like Hitler now. I think the other thing that I talk about in the book is the decline of violence, which is staggering. It sounds counterintuitive, but that's happening as well. So we've just got cats that look like Hitler now and less Hitlers.
So overall, do you feel positive about the future and your future, over the remaining span of your life, however long that might be? Well,
kind of no and yes, and which is an odd way to answer it. I'm not saying the future will be better, because I talk about all the downsides of these technologies. I mean, we've had a very nice chat about all the great things, but there are going to be nanotech 3 Mile Islands and there'll be biotech 9/11s. That's absolutely true. But the future could be better, and I think there's everything to play for. So, it might be, the future is very much like Kylie Minogue. It's sort of exciting but short. But it could be a renaissance, and we've got to put that option back on the table. Because the one thing I do know is if you can't imagine a better future, then you certainly can't make it happen. And so we need to at least put that back on the table, and I hope the book goes some way to going, hey, it could be brilliant. Why don't we try heading in that direction?
That was Mark Stevenson, author of An Optimist's Tour of the Future, talking to me, Dr. Kat Arney. The book's out now from all major bookshops and online retailers, and it's an absolutely cracking read, both fascinating and funny. So go and get yourself a copy now and give yourself some reasons to be cheerful about the future.